So if you see people coming and standing, encourage them to come in front. And so welcome to the embassy for this first Digital Diplomacy Series event of 2016. Before giving the floor to our Deputy Head of Mission, Luca Franchetti Pardo, just a little housekeeping. As usual, I will encourage you to silence your devices, but keep them on to live tweet the whole event. That's what it's all about. Yeah, there is a sign that says no phones outside, but disregard it. And our hashtags today will be digital diplomacy, all in one word, and women in tech. I think that they might be up there or they will appear later. Last but not least, if you had RSVP'd for our February 15th event with Alec Ross, which we had to postpone due to the unexpected snow, we're still in the process of rescheduling, and we'll let you know as soon as possible. So, Luca, the floor is yours.
Good evening, buonasera, and welcome here at the Italian Embassy. I guess that for many of you, it's not the first time, because this is a series since or now. This is the first of 26. Welcome to this the first of the series. As my colleague just said, we have the hashtags today. Feel free to use them. It says no cellular phones, but use them properly using the hashtags digital diplomacy and @women in tech. And it's really an honor for me tonight to host such a group of amazing women and professionals and focus our attention to diversity and gender in tech, government, and foreign policy. These are profoundly different worlds, but they share similarities and also they share challenges. And we also discuss tonight issues like safety online, education, entrepreneurship, and new policies as part of the road ahead. So a big, broad agenda, and that's why we have such a distinguished and vigorous and numerous panel. Since our digital diplomacy series started in 2012, the embassy hosted many innovators and leaders, both women and men. And with a certain proudness, we must say that the majority still are women panelists. We had in 2015, we had 22 panelists, and 12 of them were women. So you are a strong majority. And I want to thank really heartfully Susan Glasser for moderating our panel today. As you all know, Susan is the editor of Politico, a news outlet that has contributed to change the media and how we consume the news. She joined Politico after several years as editor-in-chief at Foreign Policy magazine, overseeing its relaunch in print as well as online. Before that, she worked in very comfortable places for the Washington Post, like Moscow, Afghanistan, Iraq, and others. So, grazie, thank you very much, Susan. Grazie also to the US CTO, Megan Smith, for being part of our series here tonight, and to all our panelists and to all you who will certainly make this evening something very, very interesting. So, thank you very much again. Susan, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much to hosting us. I think we can all thank the Italian Embassy, and I want to thank all of you, especially. I'm just blown away to see a full house at 6 o'clock on a Monday night. This is really a rock star group of panelists that the Embassy has gathered us for this conversation. So I can understand why it's a full house. I'm here mainly, in fact, to learn from this group of people. I can't think of a more sort of diverse and an important array of backgrounds and, knowledge around technology and how it's being reinvented both here in Washington and around the world to have this conversation tonight. So I want to thank all of you in advance, and especially for enlightening me around this. But I want to jump right in because it is 6 o'clock on a Monday night, the night before Super Tuesday, and I'm sure Donald Trump's name is on all of your minds, even if this isn't a panelist. And we can talk at the end about whether the great innovations in government and technology we're talking about, whether they'll survive and flourish in the Trump presidency. But I know that's not the topic of our conversation tonight. Megan is she's working to institutionalize everything as we speak, right? No, but these folks really don't need that much of an introduction, but just so you have a sense of who we all are and where we come from. Megan is the first CTO, or third CTO. What I meant is this is the first administration that's had this position, and you've been here for a little bit more than a year. Is that right?
Yeah, about 18 months. Yeah, and the president brought the CTO in with this administration, trying to bring some of these digital engagements. And we're embedded at the Office of Science, Technology Policy, so we sit with the president's science advisor. So both science advisor and myself report in as assistants.
It's terrific to have you with us tonight. Next person is Antigone Davis, who has both an amazing name and a super cool title, Head of Global Safety Policy at Facebook. How long have you had that role, Antigone?
I've been there about 1.5 years now. Prior to that, I'd worked for an attorney general actually regulating social media.
So literally at the intersection of policy and politics and sort of these new companies that are leading us toward that future. Leah Gilliam, Vice President for Strategy and Innovation at Girls Who Code. And how long have you been in that role?
4 weeks.
And how's it going so far?
It's excellent. It's awesome.
Have you reinvented the world yet?
It takes a little bit more than 4 weeks, but we're close. We're getting close.
Do you admit boys into Girls Who Code?
There are boys in some of the Girls Who Code clubs. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, we'll talk offline about that.
Sure.
No, and tell us where you came from before.
Before this, I was with the Mozilla Foundation and really working to help broaden participation on the internet and the web.
Donna, you have a really terrific role as the founder of 1776. Maybe, I'm sure most of the people here, but probably not everybody knows what that is. Do you want to sort of give us the 2 sentences on 1776?
Sure. Well, we're hard to describe in 2 sentences, and I just used one up. So we're a global network for innovators that are tackling what we consider to be the heavy lift of the shift to the global economy. So we work with both startups and institutions that are working in education and healthcare, energy, transportation, cyber, all the complicated stuff to not only clear the way so that those innovations can flourish, but to help the startups and the institutions meet each other and to benefit from each other.
So I'm sure you get a lot of pitches when we get done with the conversation.
I do, because we're also an active investor. And so if you actually do have a business, I do want to hear your pitch. So come and find me.
A quick question before we get back to everybody then. So what have been some of the most successful pitches that have come out of events you've done out of Washington? Does anybody here actually have a chance to come up to you and sell you on a big idea?
Sure. Anybody, anywhere. We're constantly scouting everywhere in the world for startups, including here in Washington, D.C. Just here in D.C., we work with about 700 companies, about 6,000 worldwide. So anybody that's in an industry where government plays a role, we want to get to know them.
Well, thank you to everybody for joining this this evening. Because we are here in Washington and very much locating this conversation at that intersection between sort of politics and policy and how the world of technology is changing all of that, I do want to start with Megan and with everybody on this question of like, what does Silicon Valley not get about Washington? You know, in your 18 months, what have been the big surprises, and then we can talk about vice versa, the other side of that street.
I think, I actually think that we're in the middle of a really exciting time where things are coming together. And actually, I remember when 1776 was coming and Open Gov Hub, I was like, DC is going to be okay. You know, that there's the beginning of sort of this, you know, there was a change, you know, in the last 10, 20 years of this idea of open systems, open innovation, transparency. I mean, of course, Sunshine Week, it starts with James Madison, so we've been doing transparency for a very long time. But this idea of whether it was open source with our tech world or Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, this idea of transparency really emerged. And I think this idea of sort of open innovation and how we collaborate lives often in our incubators, you know, all around the world. And so you see them popping up, whether they're more Fab Lab and maker spaces or more like your space, which is where the community's coming together, having small startup spaces, but also all kinds of events and vibrancy, you know, the openness of a Facebook platform on top of which so much innovation happens. So I'm excited about the cultures that are still quite plural. It's not like we're blending cultures, but the cultures that are coming together in extraordinary ways. And one of the things we've been working on, so the CTO job is to harness the power of data, innovation, and technology on behalf of the American people and people of the world. And so one of the things we've been working on is bringing Silicon Valley people even more, some had already come, of course, into work with the incredible colleagues here. We have over 300 people already here in the last 14 months between the United States Digital Service, 18F, different CIOs and CTOs who've come. And so I think it's the challenges of government. In my experience, I'm new here. These are much more complicated problems when you're not starting with full green field that you might start with a tech company. And so if we can take the super talent here and the super talent from our innovation communities of different, put them together and try to tackle these very hard problems, that's very exciting. And I think when we were not using these digital methods in tech and innovation and openness, it just makes it very slow. I sometimes tell my colleagues, you have amazing cars with flat tires. You know, get some of these techies here. They don't know exactly what to do. They don't know how to solve agriculture or education, but they know how to do things in different ways. And if we work together in cross-functional teams, we can do extraordinary things together. We do it when we're in disaster response. We do it at war. Let's do it in this time too, and get together in the way that we can. So I'm hopeful about that change where the cultures are coming together for the first time in an interesting way that hasn't been happening.
Obviously, you must be an optimist by nature to come to Washington from Silicon Valley and feel that, you know, these are cultures, plural, that can meld. But you surely must have had more than a few people whose heads exploded, not just from the level of the computer on the desk that they found here in Washington, but, you know, Washington bureaucracy is almost, if you could pick a polar opposite, right, you might be picking the polar opposites of the slow-moving, deliberative processes that we've instituted over decades to administer government to make sure things like fairness and equity are cooked into it versus the lightning warp speed of Silicon Valley and the pace of innovation. I mean, have you like what do you tell these new recruits from Silicon Valley that you are encouraging to come here? How many of them are like, you know, brought low by the state of things that they find?
Sometimes they come to do a design sprint or come for a short time, and then the mission here is so profound. You know, helping foster children, rural child poverty, getting our infrastructure figured out. The things that we work on, security, are very intriguing. These are mission-driven people, just like the government people are. And so when they're here, if they have a chance to apply their skills in their way with colleagues, they'll stay. If we keep them out and say, no, we don't want to do it that way, they will get discouraged. But what's been so incredible with the president's leadership, chief of staff, other leaders that a lot of the secretaries, Secretary Vilsack at Agriculture has just upgraded their systems. You look around the government, the GSA, people are welcoming these teammates. It doesn't make it easy. And that's one of the things that we talk about. This is a big, heavy lift. But the thing that's true is the mission is very compelling to everyone. I think that if you look at things in a different way, maybe it feels bureaucratic, but actually if you look at how we do legislation, it's quite agile. So we talk about agile code development. So Amazon doesn't write a big business plan to make Amazon. They think of that idea, but then they start with books and they start making something for books, and then they add CDs, and they make this agile thing where they're shipping constantly and adding to it. And so in the same way, legislation in a lot of ways, you know, the way that the Congress folks are working with each other, adding lines of code, lines of law. I think it's in your perspective, whether you think it's agile or not. But the cultures are quite different. But I'm really, I'm hopeful, and I'm also really excited to see the astonishing enthusiasm coming from the techies and the gov folks when they really make progress together. And just since we're here, of course, in the Embassy of Italy, we've been seeing this all over the world. So Corey Zarkis here, who leads a lot of our work for the Open Government Partnership. The president started this idea of Open Government Partnership with Ambassador Power and others with, I think in the beginning, 7 or 8 countries. That grew now to almost 70. And so we're meeting now, and there's a civic tech track, like the Mozilla colleagues and others, all our colleagues. And there's also now this real digital government component that's coming. We're not alone. The UK, we're seeing it in Chile, Kenya, France, South Korea, Israel, just, you know, around the world, this is starting, this blending of these digital tech, fast, sort of open methods like Wikipedia and other things, APIs, less RFPs, and this process of government of how we make laws and manage and come together.
And a lot of those countries have also instituted this new position of a CTO for the government.
And we're also seeing it within agencies, CTOs, chief data scientists, as well as our CIOs, digital service people with the CIOs. Often a federal CIO is an incredible procurement officer. So could they have a digital service like the US Digital Service Team? It's someone who's built Amazon or Facebook or Twitter or Mozilla or worked on startups who could come into government and be a teammate and have a tour of service. Just like lawyers come in and out of government, economists come in and out of government, or Surgeon General isn't expected to stay for their career. So can we rotate the digital techies? We thought of them as implementation. They're really part of architecture, and we need some of them in the room always. We call it TQ, like IQ and EQ. Get the TQ in the room together with everyone else, we'll move faster.
And so and I want to get to everybody else and bring them in, but this is the idea behind your creation of this US digital service. Is it institutionalized yet? I mean, if say Donald Trump or say someone else comes in, is that really yet like a foundation of the US government? What do you need to do this year to make it something that outlasts President Obama's tenure?
Yeah, so Todd Park, when he was CTO before me, started the Presidential Innovation Fellows, which has just gone through an executive order that's, think of them as entrepreneurs in residence. There were 28 of them in 11 agencies last year. Now there's about a dozen who come each quarter. They're incredible. They're digital thinkers, front end, back end, coders, designers, and they come in and they breathe life into all kinds of programs with their colleagues. 18F is embedded at the GSA. As a central team of that same kind of person. There's a couple hundred of them. And now the U.S. Digital Service is more of a hub and spoke model where they're in the agencies. They have a headquarters at OMB, Office of Management and Budget. They're in probably, we don't run them. We're not, CTO's not a VP engineering. It's more of a capacity building and a policy role. They are out in their agencies working together. They're in the IRS, they're in the VA, they're solving things for our veterans, they're solving things for State Department. They're doing beautiful work. And I think people are loving what's happening. And so whether it's through certain kinds of executive order or those kinds of things that's coming in. And also Congress seems quite supportive of them. They've seen them be supportive of their budget and continue. It seems quite bipartisan as works. Hopefully it'll keep going.
Antigone, you have a very interesting job description, which puts you at the policy side of these disputes. A lot of people have remarked on the difference in cultures as Facebook, Google have grown so quickly. They've in recent years, but somewhat slowly, sort of adopted to the Washington public policy game. Really started to invest only in the last few years. How Washington savvy are companies now like Facebook, and what are your challenges here in being a part of that more traditional kind of Washington policy game?
Well, I'll speak for Facebook and not for other companies, but I think it's a balance between what is typical to the engineering culture, which is a very iterative process where mistakes are not only allowed, they're encouraged, because that's how you sort of get towards truth or towards what is the answer of the best product or the best, whatever your goal is, with looking at things a little bit more deliberatively, a little bit more slowly, thinking about prior mistakes made. I mean, I would say Washington is probably a relatively risk-averse culture. I think engineers tend to be much more willing to take risks to try to get to the right answer. But I think the companies, certainly Facebook has done a very good job of melding those at this point. We'll see.
What is global safety in your title? What does that mean?
It sounds really
Are
big.
you making us safe? Who are you making safe?
It sounds like a really big title. Let me assure you, I'm not the only one working on it. So what it means essentially is ensuring that the people who are using our platform are safe to sort of share and connect, which is obviously the goal of Facebook. And that means dealing with issues like bullying. It means dealing with issues like harassment of women online. And it means basically also just fundamental security issues as well.
And what about the kind of more macro questions that involve, say, countries where speech isn't free, or where their speech can be used against them.
Well, that's actually one of our particularly biggest challenges is we are a global platform. Over 1.5 billion people using Facebook now, and oftentimes when you're talking to U.S. policymakers or U.S. users in the U.S., their understanding of the issues of someone, say, in Pakistan or in another country, and what they bring to Facebook culturally, what they bring to Facebook in terms of what their government structures are. That's a very a challenge. That's probably one of the larger challenges.
But so the U.S. conversation is much more around things like bullying and underage users or women, discrimination, things like that.
I think that those conversations are sort of across the board. So unfortunately, there are mean people everywhere, and there are people who harass, there are people who bully everywhere. And I think our big challenge is trying to create policies that we can apply globally. So as you can imagine, thinking of something like bullying, there are different words or different terms, or taking something like hate speech, certain types of terms that you'll hear in a particular culture without context, you wouldn't know necessarily that those are forms of hate speech. So developing policies that cross those cultural divisions or differences is challenging.
And how sophisticated do you find the debate, whether it's on Capitol Hill in Congress or in the executive branch at this point, especially around these questions of the free speech conversation, the role of Facebook and other companies? How much has that moved in the last few years?
I would say it's like all conversations getting more and more sophisticated. Look, I can look at my own personal growth in this world from when I started on the side of regulating the industry, and I would say came from a much more, fear-based perspective to where I am now. I think my progress individually is probably much like the progress of everybody in the room, and much like the progress of the people in government figuring these issues out.
So the conversation today is meant to be framed around sort of women and technology, especially as it intersects with politics, policy. Leah, I know you've only been there for a few weeks, but you have a much broader, frame of experience, obviously, around this set of issues. Why are we having a gender, conversation today, as affects this? I mean, obviously there's no, woman-specific way to have a U.S. digital service, for example. What is the Washington piece of this that's relevant to gender?
I mean, it's interesting. While my focus isn't on policy, I really do think a lot about participation. And when we think about just the sort of numbers, we know that over half of the participants, the people who populate the world, are women. But when we begin to look at some of the numbers, there's always this sort of decreasing sort of image of participation. So we know that in middle school, over 75% of young women are really engaged and interested in science and technology and engineering and math. But then when it actually comes to the moment in high school where they talk about what they want to do in college, it's like less than 5% would articulate that they're interested in something like computer science. So at Girls Who Code, our focus really is on thinking about a gender inclusive approach to computer science education and to this larger issue of participation and engagement around technology. So in many ways, it's really about how do you expand the definitions that are already existing? How do we take these concepts that we have about who does technology, what does code mean, who's smart, how are they smart, what are the things that are important to them, and really think about how we can bust that wide open. I think one of the reasons why sort of in the 80s computer science had more women who were majoring and engaged in it is that it was even wider. It was very wide open as a field. There was not one kind of specific image or person who came to mind when you would think about code or technology. Now we do have a little bit of an image, like people think, sorry, they think Mark Zuckerberg, they think, you need a hoodie and you need to look a particular way. So one thing that we're really engaged in is not just inspiring and educating, girls and helping them understand the wide range of roles that they can really take on and inhabit and all the new things they can do with technology, but really just trying to help them understand that they can really do almost anything that they want to do, and using this as a sort of as this point of entry. So thinking about computer science as a way to also think about problem solving and critical thinking and all the other kind of crucial 21st century skills that we know are out there, that in many ways, technology right now is like it's the ground game, right? It's the thing that you need to know in order to understand so many other points of entry. So for us, we're really thinking about participation and broadening the kinds of discussions that we've had this far.
So that's your organization, but you obviously do have a broad experience with, with this field and where it's going. What is the U.S. Digital Service? What is the CTO of the United States? What do they need to do to play their part in that conversation about both changing participation and also like that,
that's a great question.
I mean, how much does gender factor into it, right? Like we all know that this is about, it is related to the inequality conversation, for example. If governance is about sort of the fair and equitable division of resources, right? Like there is a direct connection, if it not necessarily one that we always have between these things. What's your view on that? Tell her what to do.
I mean, do I need to tell you what to do? I don't know that I need to tell you what to do, but I do think that we need to really think and make things broader. So CS for All is a great initiative. There was a CS for All, in New York, that's where I'm from. There's now a national CS for All, but obviously when we think about, what does it mean to introduce computer science concepts across the educational spectrum, we know that participation and equity and access is not just about giving people access in school. It's about opening up what kinds of access people have after school. It's about being able to bring, mobile devices into school. It's about really being able to value where kids learn and encourage all of the different places and all of the different people, and supporting, the larger ecosystem of ways that of these kinds of approaches. So I really think it's, starting with making computer science an essential part of what every kid is learning, and thinking about CS and computational literacy as an essential literacy is really the beginning, and then really beginning to bolster those support systems for all of the different places that kids learn, and then creating ways so that kids who don't have the kinds of helicopter parents who go out there and find new opportunities for them, or explain to them how you take an interest in video games and actually turn that into a career or a future as a designer or an engineer, or someone who's more than a player, right? Someone who's actually making and building things. Like those are those kinds of distinctions and changes that we need to see happen.
So Donna, are there still, in your view, really structural impediments to women being equal numbers of entrepreneurs who are pitching you ideas, who are equal numbers of people who are reinventing how the government presents and shapes big data? I mean, these are women who presumably have made it through a lot of the narrowing funnels, who do get to you. What does it look like at that end of it?
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of work to do and a long way to go still. So, and I don't think that it's on either side of the bridge. I think it's on both sides. So if we think about, let's take the structure for entrepreneurship and investing, women are still getting a fraction of all venture capital, less than 8% of all venture capital. In fact, it's probably less than that if we take out women on the founding team versus women as the founder. It's an abysmal percent. And if we really dig into that, the percentage of women who are venture capitalists who are controlling the investment dollars is even smaller. So there is subconscious bias as well as blatant bias in the industry, and we hear a lot of debate going on. There have been some excellent blog posts lately about "Don't compare me to your wife." There's a great post on that, which I cannot tell you the number of times when I pitched a business that the investor hearing the business said, "Oh, I should ask my wife about this," or "You remind me of my wife," or "My wife would like this." And the recognition that you should be able to take my gender out of the equation. I have nothing in common with your wife unless she's a founder, right? So it's there are true issues here, and so if we take that side of the equation, that's part of it. The other part are the things that we as women need to be doing more of. So We see an incredible proportion of women who are the founders, who aren't the ones who pitch their businesses. We run a worldwide startup competition in 60 cities around the globe. We fight very, very hard to get women to not only apply, but to be the ones that stand up on stage. And so when they apply, we'll look at the numbers and say, oh, we've got 50% women in the field. But when we get to the pitch day, there are no women to be seen. So they've deferred to their male founders. And we also have to think about the structure of how this industry works. How much happens after hours? How much requirement is there that you have to pick up stakes and move to another city to be successful? How do you handle it if you've got children? And structurally, how do you engage and do the kind of networking that you need to do to meet the investors if the activities are happening and forcing you to make decisions about, do I go home to my 5-year-old or do I go to that networking event to see if I can meet investors? So we have a lot of work to do. But I will say it's work that if you put your mind to it, it can be done. So, we're at our campus in Washington, D.C. We have campuses now in 3 cities around the world. We're 40% women at our campus in Washington, D.C., which is not where we want it to be, but higher than most in the world. And that's because we pay attention to it. We don't speak at panels that aren't balanced. We never put on an event that doesn't represent a balanced view of what we want the entrepreneurial ecosystem to look like. And we quietly call other people out on it when we see the behavior happening. We'll email them or have a phone call with them behind the scenes. So we have to be different. We have to expect different. We have to encourage others to expect different. But we also have to understand that women need an extra layer of encouragement to see their growth businesses. The single biggest lever we have, frankly, as a country in terms of job creation is women-led businesses. If we could get the women-led businesses that are already there and doing about $1 million in revenue to see high-scale growth as an objective, we could literally close the job gap overnight if we could solve that one problem.
Mm-hmm. So, Megan, you came 18 months ago from Silicon Valley. It looked inside these companies and saw it firsthand. How much do you think gender is a factor, or is it really a pipeline issue? Do you really have to go all the way back to, we're just not producing enough young women technologists? How much is there an active level of discrimination? We've all read the stories about, various high profile cases in Silicon Valley where executives who are sort of under fire, who are women. What's your take on that?
Well, I think you have to look at, I always divide things into sort of almost age groups. I look at, say the K-12 pipeline. There's extraordinary work that we are doing and need to do. Mm-hmm. Computer Science for All, CS for All, is the president's push that we're talking about. How to get in the classroom. Coding is definitely a 21st century skill that all our kids need. 9 out of 10 parents want this for the kids in class. And when we say CS, we don't, of course, apps are fine, but we also want data science, computational thinking for algebra. We want the kindergartners to be playing with blocks with logic diagrams on them if they want to do that. We want the 3rd graders to be in mystery writing class, a little more Da Vinci Code with some crypto. You want to put this into all the places so the kids aren't afraid of it, and so that we can leverage that power of creative confidence and especially get into elementary school. And we're starting to see that actually all around the world, certain countries, UK and others, moving to do that. So that's sort of that age group. There's tremendous bias there, culture bias. Most of it is not as overt. We're talking about it lives more in institutional bias or in sort of unconscious bias. A very large percentage of computer science high school teachers think the boys are better than the girls despite the evidence. When the children watch television, they see, according to Gina Davis and the USC research, 15-to-1 boy programmers are men to girls on the animated and acted shows. That's not true of the industry. It's just Hollywood thinks, oh, I need to have a computer scientist. They cast a boy. So that's very devastating. It's hitting them. So I think we need to get over those barriers for the kids. At the university level, President hosted the White House Demo Day this year, and we were working on commitments and actions that can be taken. And there's great breakthroughs at the university level where people have changed their curriculum. So instead of a curriculum, one of the best ones, Harvey Mudd. So many young people will have done some self-teaching in high school. So if you walk into freshman 101 computer science class, there might be somebody sitting next to you who's coded for 8 years. It's very scary to somebody who's brand new. And so a lot of the new entry level are splitting into you're brand new at this or you have some experience. They're changing what they talk about. What's the purpose of this? So really creative work. And we had 10 pages of engineering deans sign up to changing their curriculum and starting to move towards what Harvey Mudd or University of Maryland are doing. And we're seeing great results from the change in curriculum. I think Harvey Mudd is in almost 50% women, many more people of color. Maryland, others are seeing great success. So that's that group. Let's go to grownups. So with the grownups, there's those who are
re-educate them, right?
Well, there's just so much talent here, and people, are going to retrain for careers. So there's things like the President's Tech Hire Initiative. We have 600,000 jobs open in the United States in IT. So there's 5.5 million jobs open. The largest chunk is IT, and they're all over the country. They are, they're not just in tech, they're in manufacturing and retail and agriculture. And so they're design thinking, they're digital marketing, they're coding, they're cyber. They pay 50% more than the average American salary. But people aren't jumping into them. So what do we do to help people? So that's what the Tech Hire Initiative is about. It's using these short course boot camps. And we have 35 cities now working on this ecosystem where the employers are open to, in addition to as many of the 4-year and 2-year degrees as they can get, they're also starting to hire somewhere out of a 3-month program. People are moving out of jobs that pay relatively lower salaries into something that would pay 60 or 90K, 90+% graduation rates and placement rates into these things. So that's an exciting ecosystem that's emerging that we can use to pull more people into tech and to solve that national problem. So there's pipeline work, we have to change that, and then culture work. So we saw, in the demo day, we saw Xerox, Microsoft, Pinterest, several companies join the Rooney-Murray rule, which is where if you have, IBM's been doing this for decades. If you're hiring for a particular slate, you just sign up and say, I will make sure there are diverse candidates as I go out to hire for this position. There will be people of color and women as I hire for this exact position. Those companies are doing that. We saw Intel, set a goal that they will match the pipeline of America by 2020, and had just announced, I think, a couple weeks ago at CES that they're ahead of their goals. They've set those targets for hiring. And then the culture work that everybody's working hard on internally, unconscious bias training and others. But it's a huge national problem. We need to unlock these opportunities for all of our talent. And it's interesting to reflect on times when we struggle, like during the war, World War II, we invented computers, and actually the first digital programmers in America were 6 women. A largely untold story. Grace Hopper invented coding languages. Most people said to her that, why would we want to not use this machine code? She said, well, many more people can do this if we can use an English-like language. And so she invented what became COBOL and is now Java and Perl and all these languages. So we need to also know our history. I was just with Joanna Hoffman, who Kate Winslet won the Golden Globe for playing her. The stories on TV are not the story that she lived. She never ironed anyone's shirt, even though they show that in the movie. Her son actually said to her, Mom, did you really iron Steve Jobs' shirt? She's like, Jeremy, I have never ironed a shirt except one time, and it was for you when you had to do some Model UN or something. I mean, we bias ourselves.
I know, but you are an optimist. I mean, which again is important in your role. But you've been on the inside of these companies. You've lived in Silicon Valley. 8% of the venture capital money. Clearly, whatever it is that we're doing is not enough. So
not at all. We have to push hard.
Most of the initiatives that you're talking about are longer term things. They involve changing the pipeline. They involve changing culture, which is not exactly something that's easy to do. Aren't there more proactive things?
I think there's many things that we can talk about, all the different things. The companies are doing many things. We're pushing a lot of visibility. Like the venture capital one is a good example. We had the Venture Capitalist Association at White House Demo Day sign up, 42 companies signing up to diversify partners and to work on the diversity of their own startups and work on their own training. So we're beginning to see the shift, but it's really choking the economy to not get our act together in these areas. And it has to do with both culture within the companies and how we shift and adapt and open that up, and how what we do about pipeline. And I launched a search with the US Archivist for a document called the Declaration of Sentiments. How many people have ever heard of that? Okay, so a couple. This is the fundamental document from Seneca Falls, which is the first gathering of women for women's rights, 1848. And in that, it lists almost all the things we're talking about: equal pay, monopolizing all the high-paid employments, access to these various fields, access to education. So these have been challenges that have been going for a long time. And the one that I would note at the bottom, and I encourage you guys to read it. We haven't found the document yet. We have copies of it. Frederick Douglass, who signed it, put it in the Northern Star, so we have it. But it talks about destruction of confidence as one of the fundamental problems that women were facing at that time, and we continue to face. And if you look at the studies, women will apply for a job if they have 7 of the 10 characteristics, and men will apply if they have 3 of the 10. And so that's where the venture capitalist challenge you're talking about, like, I'll make the presentation, I'll make the president. Oh, okay. And so helping ourselves feel confident and being able to get in there and having people conscious of this cultural problem so we can adapt our cultures to be more welcoming and change, for equal pay, work on leave, work on family issues and all those things so that we have not institutional or unconscious bias going on.
I know I want to get everybody else in here. Come up with your questions, because I know you all came with lots of great questions tonight, and I want to make sure that we get to everybody. But Antigone, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, to give you a sense of sort of the complexity of the issues here. I mean, from my perspective, from the safety team perspective. So one of the things that women face offline that manifests as well online are real safety issues. So you think about like game developers or Gamergate, right? Those are not things that male developers face. And so one of the things that Facebook is doing, in addition to working on the pipeline issues and such as doing a really deep dive look at women's safety online. Are there ways that we can adjust our products, our policies to create a safe environment, not only for the people who are using Facebook, but also for developers and such. And it's all those multiple layers. I mean, confidence gets broken down if you don't feel safe. Exactly.
Excellent point. All right, who's going to be first to jump in here? In the back. And by the way, can you guys, when you do ask a question, identify yourself, say where you're from,
Testing.
Make it a question if you can.
Yes. My name is Shereen Mitchell. I'm the founder of Digital Sisters. I'm also the founder of Stop Online Violence Against Women. I started helping women and girls of color get into tech since 1999. My question is, since we're talking about online harassment, one of the challenges that I face right now after teaching young girls to get online is the way they are harassed and treated differently. And that's part of the reason that they no longer want to get into tech. But what's not being talked about is how women of color are being faced with this based on their religious, race, and gender, because we seem to only want to talk about the gender perspective. So race threats, death threats, rape threats are all a part of what's happening online quite often. And what can we do to address that politically, as well as professionally with the tech companies moving forward?
How much does that factor into either of your work?
Well, I was going to say, Vice President Biden was on stage last night at the Oscars talking specifically about It's on Us and campus sexual assault. I'd known that the data around 1 in 5 women are assaulted, but I hadn't actually known about 1 in 20 men are assaulted. Just, we have to figure out, as the Vice President said, how are we going to have this culture shift, and what is physical in our regular world comes and lives with us in digital world. There's a wonderful piece that was written, the Clue Train Manifesto is an early internet piece, and they recently wrote something called The New Clues. And in there they talk about how the internet is just us. It's not really some wires or other things, it's just us. And so we bring everything, it talks about the amazing things that we've done, like Mozilla, Wikipedia, Facebook, all these incredible entrepreneurial things and caring, sharing and social. But it also talks about how we've weaponized it from, and sort of go after people. So this is a challenge of our day, and how do we come together as culture? And so from a White House government perspective, I think there's a range of things that we can do in policy. There's things we can do to bring together sort of the all hands on deck push that we do as we do community. Our colleagues in law enforcement, you were doing that at the state level, and the actions that they can take. I know that Brazil is doing extraordinary work around domestic violence, where they're working much harder on the training of the police. For this situation, they can get to a point where the people will end up in a more successful court case. And so there's a clearer path to people learning that this is against the law in certain cases. So we have a lot of work to do. My colleagues probably on this panel have a lot of thoughts here. I don't know if you guys want to talk about that.
I mean, I think what you're doing is really phenomenal because you've started an organization and you're directly working with the kinds of girls you want to protect online. And we know that it's that combination of having kids be engaged online, but also having real-time adults who can explain to them what they're seeing and call out what is incorrect, what's wrong, what's illegal, what's harassment and what's not, so that they can create their own, in game design, it's dynamic, difficulty response systems. You need to have that real-time system that tells you that something's wrong. And being able to give that to kids, I think is a huge, huge gift. And, to me, I see education and learning and innovation as always coming together. And it's, that combination to me of having a girl understand what's right and wrong and having to be able to articulate that and begin to solve that problem, that's really, really key. Girls can solve all kinds of problems when they have the opportunity to actually articulate it and see them. And right now we're still actually not quite sure. We have a little bit of a sense, of what happens when women, get the mic, when women have power, when women get to do these things, but we're not exactly sure yet because we just haven't had that kind of access.
Yeah, that's right. But I think, what you're doing is so important because we can't tell these girls that it's okay just to not engage. We have to solve the problem because we've shifted to a digital economy and we don't want to leave over half of our population behind from the economic opportunity that presents simply because we haven't figured out the rules of engagement and we frankly are giving too much power to the bullies online. In the same way that when I was growing up, no one ever talked about bullying and physical fear, and we've made good progress in recognizing it and training people and developing strategies to engage. We need to have the same conversation online. And it's also why we all need to be engaged in the public square and in the policy conversations. We can't just say, I'm fed up with Washington, I'm fed up with politics. We have the power to define the rules for the digital economy, and we must, because we're in a completely new era and all of this stuff is fertile ground. We don't have the rules because none of this stuff existed 5 or 10 years ago.
All right, right there. Thank you, on the aisle. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Amy Don. I'm with the State Department. And I was wondering, I have 2 questions, one for Donna and one for Leah. Donna, I was wondering, is it possible in terms of, thank you.
Hi, is that better? Great. Donna, in terms of, you mentioned that with the business plan competitions that a lot of women seem to kind of get sidelined. Have you thought of is there some way to make it gender neutral? Because I know personally that I participated in a competition, and until it was the top 8, it was 50-50 in terms of women-led and male-led enterprises. And then after names were put, it was anonymous up to that point. And then when names were put on, all of a sudden the women were sidelined.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if that's a possibility. And then Leah, you mentioned that Girls Who Code, you practice gender inclusive learning. And I was wondering, I'm a graduate of an all-girls high school. I'm wondering what sort of adjustments you've made to be more inclusive of women. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll start. Your question is an excellent one, and there's study after study that shows that when we eliminate gender and we make it a blind sample, women actually tend to fare better than men in both business plan, pitch competitions, as well as coding competitions. But when we attach gender, something happens and the biases kick in and women are actually scored significantly less. It is a big issue. We actually have been having a lot of these conversations around next year's Challenge Cup and what do we do about it. But the solution that we feel is really important is to not just encourage more women to pitch and to be the ones that take the stage, but to ask ourselves, what criteria are we using and what language are we using and what language are we expecting to hear, and is that biasing our solution? Because it turns out women speak differently about their business. They use different terms, which can be interpreted as less aggressive, less driven, and therefore less likely to scale. But we also have an explicit conversation with our judges about recognizing the biases that we bring in, and would we be asking these same questions if it was a male founder or not? And so we make that part of the judging room conversation as well. But it just showcases how much more room we have to change the dynamic. When we attach a woman's name to something, it completely changes the expectation of their likelihood to succeed. And it isn't just men doing it, right? We as women also have our biases. And I always say to people, when you walk up to a group of people and you shake hands, do you shake the man's hand first or the woman's hand first? And I think we all have to admit that we have an expectation of what the CEO, what the successful, driven founder looks like, and we have to force ourselves to put a very different lens on it.
Just to really speak briefly, I mean, one of the things that we really look at when it comes to developing the curriculum is to make sure that we're talking about real CS. I mean, I think particularly when it comes to technology, there's often a little bit of a tendency to sort of pinkify things, right? If you're making it for a girl, how can you make it, wearable technology? Is always the kind of point of entry when people are thinking about, how do you get girls in technology? I love wearables. I'm not dissing wearables at all, but I do think there's a way in which you want to make sure that you don't pull back and make things easier, but that you really provide role models, exposure, history lessons. You give people a really wide and clear sense of all of the types of people who've participated and helped create computer science as a field, as well as just giving them those kinds of experiences where they're building and working together. So at Girls Who Code, we have male teachers. It's not that the whole sphere is completely, female-centered all day, but we do think about that inclusion piece in a really particular way. And when we're going out, when we're recruiting, we're going beyond the pale to really look for Black girls, to look for Latinas, to look for girls who are on free and reduced lunch in their schools, and to make sure that those are the girls that we're bringing into our programs, because it's a huge issue. So we're not just thinking about gender inclusion, but we're really trying to put the diversity and inclusion piece as part of that larger picture. But really, it's we always talk about real CS and not pinkifying it, exposure to mentorship, and then just that strong engagement of seeing other women, of being there with young girls at their age, and really feeling that strong network in the classroom and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that pinkify phrase. Where does that come from?
It's out there.
One thing that was interesting in First Robotics, you guys know First Robotics, some of the Lego and other robotics clubs. In the early days, Dean Kamen, who was the founder, shared that in the Lego League, when they just were scoring points on the board, it was mostly boys. And when they changed and added a theme, purpose, whether it was helping seniors, or it was still moving the robots to score points to help the seniors, but it gender balanced. So one, you were just mentioning there's really 4 key things. One is to try it, to actually experience this in a joyful, fun way, play with the code, play with what it is, understand what it's for in a real world way. Data science, climate change, help test water, help do the things that are around me, help with, we have a whole thing, we just had a 10th grader training we have a thing called the Police Data Initiative, which is using open data across criminal justice and policing, as well as data that the forces are using to manage their teams. We just had a 10th grader, Grace, teaching the New Orleans police chief how to code and how he could use some of this stuff. So get them to do something they care about that matters in the world. So that's part of it. Encouragement. And then heroes. And really, if you talk to just about anybody who's come into STEM or tech or these things, if they've had those 4 components, they're headed this way. And we want to make sure that all the kids are having those experiences as soon as possible.
Right here.
Hi, thank you, panelists. My name is Zubeida, and I do digital engagement at the World Bank. I just wanted you to share your thoughts on the migration of females in the tech industry, especially when it comes to workplaces and income gaps. we've had a bunch of women who decide to start a family, for instance, who are leaving the industry. And I was curious if there are any policies that are out there to help address that, or examples of organizations that are at least trying to address this. Thank you.
Well, as I say, I know, just to give a couple that Facebook has done recently. So we have paid parental leave 4 months for mothers and fathers. And another thing that we've done recently, well, I don't know how recently, but have been doing for a while, is providing. Shit, I just lost my train of thought. Forgive me.
Internships.
Oh, go ahead.
I don't know if
you can answer me, but
I don't know if you guys are doing, but I know that several of the Silicon Valley companies are doing returnships, which is if a person has left on leave to raise children, how could you get them to come back? It's a really creative, fabulous code. Tons of coders have left. You want them in the industry. So the idea, this was an idea where you come for the first 6 months and you work from 9 to 3 or whatever the school hours are that the person would prefer. And then they're doing different kinds of kind of more starter projects and coming back into it. And then they ramp into regular work, but they can keep those hours if they want. So really creative ways to bring women and men who may have stepped out, which is good. But I think the leave that you were talking about and getting really smart, we want everybody to be great parents, right? So President Valerie Jarrett and others have been working on, paid family leave and equal pay and all these components for all of the industry sectors. And tech, is one of these that really has woken up to value its employee in a particular way. We see it with sort of the environments they're creating. And so waking up about all of the needs of all the employees is a real opportunity. And you're seeing the companies like IBM and Intel and Facebook and others really starting to notice and ask and adapt their benefits to match exactly as you're talking about, so that it's not an institutionalized bias because it has, for example, like the academy has a form of pregnancy discrimination, really, the way that tenure works. I don't think women would have designed the tenure track the way that it works. And so how can the academy adapt the tenure track so it works better for men and women who are having young children, so that dads and moms can be more involved?
Yeah, that's actually reminded me. So one of the things that we do is we subject our salaries to an audit. So Facebook will audit through the salaries to ensure that there are no gender and as well as other biases. And we'll look across and track across our employees to ensure that our salaries are matching, that there is an equality.
A really interesting finding that Salesforce had was that they realized in their findings that their women were overpaid. And they knew that was wrong. So they needed to figure out why. And it was interesting to listen to Mark Benioff, the CEO. They realized they were under promoting the women. And so Coca-Cola also has talked a little bit about how they were in their promotion cycle. They have ready in 2 years, ready in 1 year, ready now for various employees. And they were holding the women at ready at a year this year and next year and the other. And so they had this thing where the women were hitting, and so they were becoming overpaid for that level when they should have been promoted far earlier. It was a very great finding for Salesforce that they've since been working on and adapting.
And Megan, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to say, this goes back to the flexibility, yes, by all means, innovation and work, but it still doesn't explain why only 8% of venture capital money goes to women. Doesn't explain, the women at the top who have made their trade-offs. They've gone through the pipeline. They've gotten their PhD in computer science. They've endured the indignities of the workforce as it currently exists, right? And yet there's such a clear and persistent evidence of bias after having jumped through all the hoops that, we can all agree we should change how those hoops are structured. But I think that point begins to get at it, that the structure of work has to change, not just in a flexibility of hours kind of way.
Yeah, the structure of work, and also how we're measuring and valuing each other. It's very interesting research in the unconscious bias space, where people might measure a man who helps out gets extra credit, a woman who helps out is expected. A man who doesn't help out is no problem. A woman who doesn't help out gets dinged. And so if you there's interesting cycles that you can run in unconscious bias. If you look at the various research studies, you run that slight difference across 20 promo cycles and you split the company. And so it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so you'll end up with, feedback. So how do we get in and debug this? And what's exciting, I think, about the tech industry is that if it decides to prioritize things, this is a very innovative crew that likes to get on this stuff. And so, again, I'm an optimist. It's been great to see, some of the leadership companies, Intel, Microsoft, others, stepping up into figuring out how are we going to debug our culture, Pinterest, and others, many, Facebook and others. So it's hard work, and we need to get to it because it's a serious problem.
But the good news is that we're finally tracking the data, right? So whereas 5 years ago we didn't know the numbers, now we know how bad it is, but you can't fix what you don't measure. One of the things, though, that we see as a persistent issue is that the difference between sponsorship and mentorship is a real impact for women. Men tend to sponsor each other, so they'll open doors, bring opportunities, pull the next guy up, whereas women will tend to get mentorship, which is sort of subject matter expertise. Let me coach and counsel you, but I'm not actually opening doors for you. And so it's one of the biggest hurdles that women face in getting into those upper echelons of executive levels, boards, CEO positions. If someone's not opening doors for you and you're not already at the table, it's very hard to get those doors open on your own.
Even though you didn't call attention to it, Megan, I would say that your very notion of debugging the culture is definitely something where Washington and Silicon Valley are not yet always talking to each other, except in rare exceptions. All right, we probably have time only for one more question because you guys have had so many great ones. You get to ask the last one.
Hi, I'm Rachel Rubin at the State Department. So there was an interesting movement, I think, about a year ago where male academics, several prominent male academics, kind of announced that they would not serve on panels with less than 50% women. And I thought that was really interesting from a variety of points, if not symbolic, and people criticize it for being superficial, et cetera. I mean, I thought it was really significant. Is there any kind of comparable, this is food for thought, is there any kind of comparable effort that could be made in the tech industry on such a visible level in the future? All of you.
Thank you for bringing that up. I thought, you, Donna, mentioned that actually as something, and I've seen that in the foreign policy world. When I was the editor of Foreign Policy magazine, even this was just a few years ago, I would routinely, almost always, in fact, expect to be either the only woman or, moderating something and have a large percent, even more than the underrepresentation of women in politics, right? Women in foreign policy was really an even smaller group. And yet I've noticed a big difference by simply saying, it's not enough to sort of call out a behavior by just simply saying like, oh, we're not going to show up to policies where there are no, or to panels where there are no women. I think it's changed sort of the Washington conversation in a very concrete way. You mentioned it in the tech world too, a little bit.
Yeah, it's happening more and more, not as much as it needs to, but there's a really great site. I think it's called Congratulations, You Have an All-Male Panel. Really, really well named. But if you go there, basically anybody can be posting pictures and shaming publicly people who are having an all-male panel. And, we look at it and we go, God help us, don't let us get on there.
Exactly.
But, the great part about the internet is that we can take these things public and we can say this is not acceptable, and we can say we're not going to do it. So my co-founder, who is male, he and I have this conversation all the time. We see the bias blatantly because there's two of us with equal roles, and we see it in how it's opportunities come to us, the different kinds of things we're asked to do, or the doors that are opened for us, very different. And so we have an agreement that neither one of us will speak on a panel that, or at an event where it's, the majority of the speakers are male. And we'll have that conversation of, we'd love to join your panel. Who else is speaking and how is this diverse? And it's not just gender diversity, it's also racial diversity. And until the people who have the leadership and the influence in the industry today say this is not acceptable and I won't participate, that won't change. But there's lots of us who are doing that, and I encourage you to go to that website and post pictures when you see the all-male panels.
All right. Well, a good note to end it on. I was thinking of the power of a photograph, whether it's of an all-male panel or of an all-female panel like this one. It's not often enough that happens. When Justin Trudeau became the new Prime Minister of Canada, and one of the first things he did, right, was to name a 50% female candidate and cabinet. And I was really struck by the fact that even just that photograph had the power to shock. And of course, you know, they put all the women in red in that first picture to sort of underscore it. But it's a delight for me to have an all-women panel talking about these issues and to see there's optimism still in Washington, even if I'm going to needle you about how far it takes us. Thank you to all of you for sharing your night tonight. Yes.